I'm Ethan Harper, living in Pinewood Meadows, Oregon, where I turned 3 acres by Silverlake into my private paradise, wildflower meadows, hand-laid stone paths, a place I've sweated over for decades to perfect. But when the HOA here, led by my smug neighbor Abigail Wentworth, threw a lavish Sweet 16 party with 57 cars trampling my land, I decided to teach them an unforgettable lesson by auctioning off every last one of those vehicles. What would you do if your neighbor's luxury car was parked wrong and about to be sold to the highest bidder? I never thought I'd become the villain of the neighborhood just for defending my property, but that's what happened last Saturday, when my peaceful afternoon turned into a parking nightmare. It started when I drove back from the grocery store, bags of produce stacked on the seat. I saw a line of cars turning onto the private road leading to my land. At first I thought they'd taken a wrong turn, but as I got closer, my heart sank. At least 20 cars were already parked on my meadow, shiny SUVs, sports cars, even luxury sedans and more were rolling in. "What the hell is this?" I yelled at a guy in a red vest, directing a Mercedes SUV to park right in the middle of the wildflowers I'd planted. "We're handling parking for the Wentworth party next door," he replied coolly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I glanced toward Abigail's house, separated from my land by a row of trees, pink balloons, thumping music. It was a Sweet 16 for her kid, no doubt, but why on my property? I stormed inside, flung the grocery bags onto the kitchen table, anger boiling up. Looking out the window, I saw the cars multiply, crushing grass, flowers, everything I cherished. No, I wasn't letting this slide. I marched straight outside, heading for Abigail's to confront her. I crossed the low tree line separating my land from Abigail Wentworth's mansion, each step heavy with fury. Her house loomed like a theater stage, pink balloons everywhere, a giant Sweet 16 banner strung across the gate, and bass-heavy music from expensive speakers pounding my ears like a sledgehammer. Teens in sparkly outfits clustered at the entrance, laughing loudly, while cars kept pouring onto my land like it was a public lot. I clenched my fists, determined not to let Abigail off easy this time. She spotted me before I could ring the bell. Abigail stepped out, wearing a designer dress that hugged her frame, her highlighted hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Her smile bloomed, polished to fake perfection, but her eyes were cold, devoid of warmth. "Ethan, so nice to see you," she said, her voice syrupy like spoiled honey, standing in the doorway as if to shoo me away. "Lovely day for a walk, isn't it?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Why are there dozens of cars parked on my land, Abigail?" I asked, my voice hardening as the image of my trampled wildflowers flashed in my mind. Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, it's Lily's Sweet 16 today," she replied, as if that explained everything. "Didn't you get the HOA notice?" I frowned. "What notice?" Abigail rummaged through her purse, slowly pulling out a crumpled paper, holding it up like a trophy. "The HOA granted us temporary use of the land for overflow parking. Victor Grayson, the president, signed it this morning. See?" She pointed to a scribbled signature at the bottom. I snatched the paper from her, skimming it. Temporary rights on adjacent property, but no signature from me, no notice sent my way. "I never agreed to this," I growled, eyes locked on the document. "No one asked me." Abigail shrugged, her face feigning sympathy. "Well, the HOA board voted. Nothing you can do about it, at least not until tomorrow." My blood boiled as she continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's just for today, Ethan. Lily has a lot of friends, they have to park somewhere, don't they?" Right then, a glossy black Porsche Cayenne rolled past the trees, its tires crushing the tulips I'd planted last spring. I heard the crack of breaking soil, and that was the last straw. "Those cars need to be moved now," I said, my voice like steel, pointing at the meadow now resembling a battlefield. Abigail's friendly mask vanished in an instant, replaced by a sneer. "Listen, Ethan," she lowered her voice, but her words cut like knives. "Every important family in Pinewood Meadows is here today. Judge Holland's son, Dr. Nguyen's daughter, even Mayor Peterson brought his twins. Do you really want to make a scene?" A group of parents nearby glanced over, champagne flutes glinting in their hands, as if waiting to see if I'd dare. I gritted my teeth. This wasn't authorized by me, Abigail. That document means nothing without my signature. Her eyes narrowed, but the fake smile snapped back like lightning. Don't be difficult, Ethan, it's just a few hours. Then she turned away, waving to a new group of guests, dismissing me like I didn't exist. I stood there, staring at her back, my anger hardening into cold resolve. Abigail thought she could steamroll me with money and influence. She was wrong. I headed home, phone already in hand, ready for my next move. I walked back, each step stomping on the fire of my rage. Through the kitchen window, I saw the scene outside worsening. The cars didn't stop at 20 or 30. By dusk, I counted 57, turning my beloved meadow into a chaotic parking lot. Tire tracks sliced deep into the grass, I trimmed weakly, wildflowers mashed into mud, and the stone path I'd laid stained with oil slicks. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling slightly, and started snapping photos of everything. A red BMW parked next to the old oak, its low branches snapped by someone carelessly opening a door. Near Silverlake, my private dock, where I'd watch sunsets, was now occupied by a kid dangling his feet in the water, phone in hand, an empty beer can floating beside my koi pond. I zoomed in on the pond, my heart tightening. The koi I'd raised for 3 years, each a memory, flickered beneath a layer of trash, champagne bottles, plastic cups, even a stray high heel. I counted 5 fish belly up, suffocated in the mess. Unbelievable, I muttered, taking more pictures. The music from Abigail's blared on, laughter echoing across the lake, stretching past midnight. I sat in my dark living room, the laptop screen's glow the only light on my face. My mind raced, not from exhaustion, but from anger sharpening into something fiercer: determination. I opened Pinewood Meadows' HOA bylaws, flipping through pages like a lawyer hunting evidence. The paper Abigail had waved at me replayed in my head: temporary rights, without my signature. I found the land use clause: any temporary rights on private property require written consent from the owner. None existed, no emails, texts or calls from the HOA asking me. I typed quickly into the search bar: unauthorized parking. Section 7.4 lit up like a beacon: vehicles left on private land over 24 hours without permission may be disposed of at the owner's discretion, after written notice. I read it again and again, hands shaking, but this time from excitement. Abigail thought she could wield HOA power to crush me. She was wrong. I stood, stepping onto the back porch, looking across the lake. Lights from the Wentworth mansion still blazed, shadows staggering in the party haze. Sunday morning arrived quieter, but 7 cars remained sprawled on my land: a sapphire Porsche, a few SUVs, and that red BMW. Their owners were clearly too drunk to drive home or just didn't care. I photographed each one, noting license plates, then went back inside, opening my laptop again. I cross-checked Oregon state laws on abandoned property, and it all lined up: proper notice, 24 hours, disposal rights, auction. I muttered, the idea striking like lightning. Abigail and her powerful friends would never forget this. I pictured Abigail this morning, stepping out in a silk robe, coffee in hand, smirking at the leftover cars. She didn't glance at my land, didn't bother apologizing. That's when I knew this wasn't just a party, it was a declaration of war. She'd used her HOA clout to override me, thinking money and connections would shield her. But I'm not the type to back down. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing: notice. This vehicle is illegally parked on private property. If not removed by 5 p.m. Wednesday, it will be deemed abandoned and subject to disposal. I smiled coldly. They wanted a power game. I'd show them I play better. I stood, glancing out the window one last time. Moonlight glinted off the 7 cars, like scars on my land. Abigail had no idea who she'd pissed off. I picked up my phone, dialing Clara Noine, an old college friend, now in the auction business. Clara, I need your help with something big, I said when she answered. The game was on. I set the phone down after talking to Clara, my mind still buzzing with the auction plan. But looking out the window, seeing the silhouettes of those 7 cars under the moonlight on my ravaged meadow, an old feeling stirred, not just today's anger, but a wound from Abigail Wentworth 5 years back. I sank into my armchair, closed my eyes, and let the memory flood in. That was the first time I realized she wasn't just a tough neighbor, she was someone ready to trample anyone, to hold power in Pinewood Meadows. Abigail moved here on a rainy April day, buying the mansion next door, with cash everyone whispered came from her husband, Henry Wentworth, a Portland real estate shark. It didn't take long for her to worm into the HOA. I still remember her first community meeting, standing up in a striking red silk dress, pledging $5,000 for road repairs, that smug smile plastered on her face. People clapped, but I saw her eyes scanning the room, calculating her next pawn. Within 3 months, she was on the board, then swiftly used money and sweet talk to manipulate everything. Our clash started over my wooden fence. I'd built it from cedar, tall enough for privacy around my meadow, but Abigail hated it. One Saturday afternoon, she knocked on my door, HOA rules in hand, claiming the fence was unaesthetic and had to be swapped for white vinyl to match neighborhood standards. Pinewood Meadows needs uniformity, she said, voice sugary but eyes sharp as blades. I shut her down cold. My land, my choice, I replied, slamming the door in her face. A week later, I got an HOA violation notice, threatening a $200 fine if I didn't comply. I fought for 2 months, pulling out land surveys to prove the fence was fully on my property. They backed off eventually, but Abigail didn't forget. She started nitpicking. My grass wasn't short enough, my trash bins lingered out an hour too long, like she was itching for revenge. From then on, I watched her flex her power across Pinewood Meadows. Mrs. Klein down the street got slapped with a $100 fine for a maple tree growing past height limits. Mr. Jensen, a veteran, received a warning for flying an American flag, too large. But Abigail, she threw parties until 2 a.m., and no one dared complain. Her husband golfed with half the HOA board. I began to see it. Abigail didn't just want control. She wanted everyone to know she could do whatever she pleased, without pushback. Yesterday's car invasion was the peak, but not a shock. It's how she operates, stomp on people, then smile like it's her birthright. I opened my eyes, back in the present. Staring at the notice I'd typed on my laptop, I realized this wasn't just about protecting my land anymore. It was about Abigail, her belief she was untouchable, the way she used HOA muscle to crush others without consequence. Yesterday, standing there waving that sham document and telling me, "There's nothing you can do," I heard that same tone from years ago, arrogant, superior, but this time she picked the wrong fight. I wasn't the quiet neighbor taking it anymore. I stood, glancing out the window again. Those 7 cars weren't just damage, they were symbols of Abigail's hubris, and I'd turn them into her lesson. I grabbed my phone, fingers swiping the screen, heart pounding as I thought of Abigail Wentworth, and that smug grin. After a quick call with Clarence Wynn, my old college buddy now running an auction house in Portland, I knew I needed more than an idea. I needed a rock-solid plan. "Ethan, are you serious?" Clara asked over the speaker, her voice a mix of shock and glee. 57 cars on your land? I'm in, but you've got to do this by the book, or they'll sue you back. I gave a dry laugh. Only 7 left now, but enough to make them remember. I found a loophole in the HOA rules. You game? Clara jumped in instantly, promising to set up the auction site and rally her team. Sunday morning I stood on my porch, eyeing the 7 remaining cars, sapphire Porsche, 2 silver SUVs, that red BMW, and a few others scattered across my meadow like remnants of yesterday's war. Abigail hadn't bothered cleaning up, and that only fueled my resolve. I went inside, opened my laptop, and started a list. First, I called my nephew Tyler, a 24-year-old fresh out of communications at the University of Oregon. "I need you to set up live stream cameras," I said when he picked up. 7 cars on my land are getting auctioned. I want the world to see. Tyler laughed hard. "You're nuts, but I love it. I'll bring 4 cameras over pronto." I thanked him, knowing the live stream would be my ace, not just to document, but to amplify the pressure on Abigail. Next, I called my brother-in-law Jim, who runs a small security firm in Salem. "Jim, I need to rent portable fencing, the sturdy kind, delivered by Wednesday morning," I said, urgency in my tone. These cars are illegally parked on my land, and I want them boxed in before I sell them. Jim whistled through the phone. You're going big, huh, Ethan? All right, I'll have my crew drop it off at 6 a.m. Need guards. I declined. Tyler's cameras would suffice, and I wanted to handle this myself. After hanging up, I sat down, opening the notice I'd drafted last night. This vehicle is illegally parked on private property. If not removed by 5 p.m. Wednesday, it will be deemed abandoned and subject to disposal. I tweaked a few words, printed 7 copies, and took them to the laminator in my garage. If Abigail wanted to play the paperwork game, I'd show her how serious I was. Monday night, I stood in my garage, holding 7 bright orange envelopes with the notices, palms sweaty. The moon hung over Pinewood Meadows, its faint light filtering through the trees. I pulled on a black hoodie, tugged a baseball cap low, and stepped outside with the lightest footsteps I could manage. Cold wind off Silverlake carried the scent of wet grass and car oil. I approached the first car, the sapphire Porsche, my heart racing like it might burst. I glanced at Abigail's house, lights still on, shadows moving behind curtains. She might be calling someone on the HOA board, but I didn't care anymore. I slapped the notice on the windshield, pressing the tape hard to stick, then darted to the next one. Each time I bent down, my heartbeat thumped in my ears, imagining Abigail or someone stepping out to yell. The red BMW was the toughest. It sat near the tree line, less than 20 meters from her house. I held my breath, placed the envelope on the glass, then stepped back to check. 7 cars, 7 notices, all done in 15 minutes. I stood in the meadow, exhaling, looking at my handiwork under the moonlight. The orange envelopes glowed like tiny flames, defying Abigail's arrogance. I walked home, locked the door, and sank onto the couch, adrenaline still surging through me. Before bed, I called Clara again. Notices are up, I said, voice low but steady. Wednesday, 5 p.m. is the deadline. After that, you launch the auction site. Got it. Clara laughed over the line. Ethan, you're a neighbor's nightmare. I'll be ready at 6 p.m. Don't let them catch you slipping. I nodded, though she couldn't see. They won't get the chance. I hung up, glancing out the window one last time. Abigail thought she was untouchable, but I was ready to flip the board. Wednesday would be a day she'd never forget. Tuesday morning, I woke to pale sunlight seeping through the blinds, but my mind was already out on the meadow. I stepped onto the porch, hot coffee in hand, and saw the 7 cars still there, orange envelopes blazing on their windshields, like little victory flags. I smiled, but it faded when Abigail Wentworth emerged, stomping across her lawn in heels that sank into the soft ground. Her face was flushed, arms flailing like she wanted to tear through the air, and I knew she'd seen the notices. I set my coffee down, bracing for the storm ahead. Ethan Harper, what the hell do you think you're doing? Abigail screamed when she was a few meters away, her voice shrill enough to drown out the morning birds. She stopped at the tree line, pointing at the sapphire Porsche. Take those ridiculous notices down now. That Porsche belongs to Jake Miller, my Lily's boyfriend, and the others are kids of HOA board members. I crossed my arms, stepping to the edge of my land, keeping my voice calm but icy. The notices say it clear, move the cars by 5 p.m. tomorrow, Abigail. I'm following HOA procedure, section 7.4, notice and disposal of abandoned vehicles. Want to see the docs? She froze for a second, then charged closer, her heels kicking up dirt. Don't try to play rules with me, she hissed, her face so close to the trees I could smell her pricey perfume. This is the kids' property, not junk. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo gallery, and held it up for her to see. Is it? Here's my koi pond, full of beer bottles from your party. Here's the stone path I laid, smeared with oil. And here's my meadow I've tended for 20 years, trashed by 57 of your cars. I've got it all documented, Abigail. Your guests caused thousands in damage. Her eyes narrowed, but I wasn't done. You want to talk property? Then move those cars, before I sell them legally. Abigail gasped, clearly not expecting me to push back this hard. This is the most absurd thing I've ever heard, she shouted, drawing a glance from a neighbor walking their dog nearby. Victor won't let this happen. You'll regret this, Ethan. She spun on her heel, sinking deeper and nearly tripping before storming back to her house, phone already pressed to her ear. I stood there, watching her vanish, knowing the fight had just begun. By noon, Pinewood Meadows was buzzing. I was pulling weeds from a surviving flower bed when I heard a car slow by. Mrs. Klein, once fined by Abigail over her maple tree, stopped to eye the 7 cars I'd mentally fenced in. "Ethan, what's going on?" she asked, her eyes glinting with curiosity. I gave her the short version: Abigail's party, 57 cars, my auction plan. She nodded, a faint smile tugging her lips. "She's had it coming for a while," she whispered before driving off. But not everyone was on board. On the Pinewood Meadows Facebook group, I saw anonymous comments: "Someone thinks they're the sheriff now, and mess with HOA kids, and you're done." I shrugged. They feared Abigail's clout, but I didn't. By afternoon, word spread like wildfire. Tyler texted me, "Uncle, the neighborhood chat's exploding. Some call you a hero, others say you're crazy." I checked my phone, finding a flood of friend requests from people I'd never spoken to. A local reporter, likely tipped off somehow, message: "Heard you're selling HOA kids' cars. Can I interview you?" I didn't reply yet, but the pressure was mounting. Abigail might call me a jerk, but the community was splitting, and I knew I'd just kicked a hornet's nest. I looked at the meadow again, the orange envelopes still holding strong. Abigail wanted war, she'd get it. Tuesday night, I sat in my living room, laptop light casting shadows on my face, as I checked an email from Clara Nguyen. "Auction site's ready, Ethan. Log in at 6 p.m. Wednesday to activate." Good luck. I nodded at the screen, a mix of thrill and nerves racing down my spine. Out the window, the 7 cars sat silent on my meadow, orange envelopes glowing like a final dare. Abigail Wentworth might be plotting in her mansion, but I'd come too far to back down. I texted Tyler, "Camera set." His reply pinged instantly, "All done, Uncle. 4 angles, live stream test good. I'll swing by tomorrow for a final check." I exhaled, but sleep didn't come easy that night. The wind off Silverlake seemed to carry Abigail's whisper: "Victor won't let this happen." Wednesday morning, I woke early, brewed coffee, and stepped onto the porch as Jim's crew arrived right at 6 a.m. 4 workers quietly unloaded portable fencing from the truck, setting up metal panels around the 7 cars with professional speed. I directed them to place the barriers a meter from each vehicle, forming neat steel cages. "Looks like a car show, Mr. Harper." One worker chuckled, but I just nodded. This wasn't a joke. When they finished, I stood in the meadow, hands on hips, taking it in. The sapphire Porsche, red BMW, and SUVs were now locked in pens of my making, orange envelopes still stuck firm on their windshields. I snapped a few photos, sent them to Clara with a message: "Fencing's up, ready to launch." She replied, "Perfect, hold steady," but peace didn't last. By 3 p.m., I was checking camera cables with Tyler when the doorbell rang, rapid, like someone wanted to smash it. I opened the door, and Victor Grayson, HOA president, stood there, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in a week. He barged in uninvited, his wrinkled shirt reeking of stale coffee. "Ethan, this has gone too far," Victor said, voice hoarse, rubbing his temples. "Abigail just called me for the 10th time today. Her husband's threatening lawsuits. Stop this now." I crossed my arms, staring at him coldly. "Shoo me for what, Victor?" "For following the rules you people wrote." Victor sighed, slumping onto the couch. "You know we don't handle things like this," he said, his voice shrinking to a plea. "Abigail says you verbally agreed to the parking, just forgot to sign the paperwork." I laughed, grabbing my land survey from a drawer and slamming it on the table in front of him. "Verbally agreed. Here's my property line, Victor. 57 cars parked here without my permission. That temporary permit," she waved around. "No signature from me, it's worthless. She lied to you, and you let her." Victor stared at the survey, his face paling, but he tried to salvage it. "Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Let me fix this with Abigail, but cancel the auction. We'll cover the damages." I shook my head, pointing out the window. "Those 7 cars have been there since Saturday. I gave legal notice, 5 p.m. tomorrow is the deadline. After that, they're mine to handle, per section 7.4. Victor shot up, voice trembling. You don't get it, Ethan. Abigail has connections all over Pinewood Meadows. If you sell the board members' kids' cars, they'll make your life hell. I stepped closer, locking eyes with him. They already turned my land into hell. And you? How long have you let Abigail run the HOA? I've got until 5 p.m. tomorrow. Move the cars or see what I do. Victor left, shoulders slumped, but I knew he'd report back to Abigail. That night, I checked the cameras one last time with Tyler. You sure about this, Uncle? He asked, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Sure, I replied, though my heart beat faster than usual. Near midnight, the yard sensor lights flared. I checked the footage and saw two figures with flashlights near the cars. I zoomed in, Lily, Abigail's daughter, and Jake Miller, the Porsche owner. They snapped photos of the notices, whispered something, then bolted. I smiled coldly, they were rattled. I texted Clara, trouble brewing, you ready? She replied. Always ready. Abigail wanted to pressure me. I'd hit back twice as hard. Wednesday morning, I woke before the alarm, mind racing with images of the 7 fenced cars on my meadow. I stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and saw thick fog blanketing Pinewood Meadows, turning Silverlake into a misty white mirror. The metal fencing peeked through the haze, encircling the cars like silent ghosts, the sapphire Porsche, red BMW, and glossy SUVs. The orange envelopes clung to the windshields, defiant against the night wind. I sipped my coffee, a mix of nerves and resolve flooding me. Today was the day Abigail Wentworth and the HOA would learn I wasn't bluffing. Tyler arrived at 7 a.m., backpack stuffed with gear slung over his shoulder. Cameras are solid, Uncle, he said, checking each angle on his phone. Live stream's ready, just say the word. I nodded, telling him to add a small sign near the fencing, unauthorized vehicle auction, 6 p.m. today. We worked fast, setting up a wooden platform near my property line, a simple stand I'd borrowed from Jim's garage, enough to speak from if needed. By 10 a.m., the fog lifted, and the meadow stood clear with my 7 steel prisoners. I took final photos, sent them to Clara. Everything's set, I texted. She replied instantly. Auction site goes live at noon. Already got 20 bidders. It's gonna be big. But the mood shifted by midday. I was testing wires with Tyler when I heard a car crawl by. Mrs. Klein, the neighbor who'd backed me, stopped and leaned out her window. Ethan, I just saw Abigail out front, on the phone non-stop, she said, voice low like someone might overhear. She looked panicked. I shrugged, but inside I knew she was rallying her troops. At 12 p.m., Clara texted, "Site's live, Porsche already has a $10,000 starting bid." I opened my laptop, seeing Tyler's photos of each car on the site, with a countdown clock. Within an hour 50 bidders had signed up, some commenting, "Who's bold enough to sell HOA cars?" I grinned. Abigail was in for a shock. By 2 p.m., Pinewood Meadows was truly buzzing. A small news van from the local station parked down the street, KOIN6 logo bright on its side. A young reporter, probably the one who messaged me yesterday, stepped out with a mic and camera. "Harper, we hear you're selling HOA kids' cars over illegal parking. Can we get an interview?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet, wait till 6 p.m. and see." She nodded but stayed, filming the fencing from a distance. Neighbors started showing up, some walking, some driving by slowly, whispering to each other. I caught snippets. "They're really letting him do this, and Abigail's gonna sue him dead." At 3 p.m., the crowd grew. Mrs. Klein returned with Mr. Jensen, the veteran Abigail once fined over his flag. "If you pull this off, good for you," he said. Voice rough but eyes bright. "She's thought she's queen here too long." I nodded, feeling the pressure rise but also a flicker of pride. My phone buzzed non-stop texts from Tyler. 80 bidders now, Uncle. I checked the site. Porsche at $15,000, red BMW bid at $12,000. I texted Clara. "Keep it steady, it's heating up," she replied. Don't worry, I've got this. Then I saw Abigail. Through the window, she stood out front of her mansion, phone to her ear, arms flailing like she was yelling at someone. I zoomed in on the camera footage, her face flushed, hair a mess, no trace of her usual polish. She glanced at my land, eyes sharp as knives, then disappeared inside. I knew she was calling Victor or someone on the HOA. Maybe a lawyer. I turned to Tyler. You catch Lily and Jake on camera last night? He nodded, showing me the clip, the two by the Porsche, snapping pics of the notice, faces frantic. They're scared, Uncle, Tyler said, chuckling. I nodded, but didn't laugh. Abigail's pressure was mounting, and I had to be ready for any move she'd pull before 5 p.m. I stepped outside, standing by the platform, eyeing the growing crowd, now nearly 20 people, some filming on their phones. The news van stayed put, the reporter interviewing Mrs. Klein. I took a deep breath, feeling like a gladiator before a fight. Abigail wanted to play big. I'd show her I wasn't afraid to hit back. Standing by the wooden platform at 4 p.m., I felt Pinewood Meadows heavy with the calm before a storm. The crowd had swelled, nearly 30 people clustered around my property line, whispering, filming, some live streaming on their phones. The 7 cars sat fenced in gleaming metal, orange envelopes on their windshields, like a wordless declaration of war. I checked my watch, 1 hour to the 5 p.m. deadline. The laptop on a small table by the platform showed the auction site, sapphire Porsche at $20,000. Red BMW at $15,000, over 100 bidders registered. I texted Clara. Things are heating up, she replied. I see it. Stay cool, Ethan. But cool was the last thing I felt when Abigail Wentworth appeared. She stormed across her lawn like a tornado, heels sinking deep, designer dress askew. No trace of her usual elegance. Victor Grayson and 3 other HOA board members, faces taut, trailed behind. Behind them Lily and Jake Miller, her boyfriend, hovered with panicked eyes. Abigail stopped at the fencing, pointing at me. Stop this insane stunt now, Ethan Harper. Her voice boomed, drowning out the crowd's murmurs. Take down the fences and give the cars back, or I swear you'll regret it. I stepped onto the platform, arms crossed, looking down at her. The notice was clear. Abigail, 5 p.m. is the cutoff. I'm following HOA Section 7.4, abandoned vehicles on private land. I can dispose of them. She smirked, but I saw her hand tremble as she pointed at the Porsche. This is theft. That car's Jake's, and the others belong to HOA board kids. You have no right to sell them. I pulled out my phone, holding up damage photos. Really? Here's my koi pond, fish dead from your party trash. Here's my 20-year meadow, now tire tracks. I gave legal notice, Abigail. You had 57 cars here without permission, and these 7 stayed. Actions have consequences. The crowd stirred, some nodding, but Abigail wouldn't back down. Victor, say something, she snapped, turning to him, voice near a scream. Victor stepped forward, voice shaky but trying for authority. Ethan, we get you're mad about the party. We can cover damages, but cancel the auction. These are our kids. I shook my head. Pointing to the paper Abigail flashed Saturday. Cover damages. When I asked that day, she said nothing you can do. This temporary permit, no signature from me, it's void. I called the HOA Monday, no meeting minutes approving this. She duped you, Victor. He paled, glancing at Abigail, but she lunged closer to the fence, face flushed. You're ruining this community. My husband will sue you bankrupt. Just then, Jake pushed forward, slamming the fence around the Porsche. Hey, that's my car, he yelled. Face red with anger. Open it now, I'm taking it. I stepped off the platform, nearing him, voice calm but sharp. You're Jake Miller. Your car's been here illegally since Saturday, over 96 hours. Notice said 5 p.m. today. After that, it's abandoned. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frantic. I was away with my dad all weekend. I didn't know. Open it, I'll move it now. I checked my watch. 4:37 p.m. Too late. Notice period's not up yet. Everything stays till 5 o'clock. He pulled out his phone, yelling. I'm calling Lily's mom. she'll fix this. Less than 10 minutes later, an engine roared. Abigail's Mercedes tore into my road, and she stormed out like a thunderclap, sunglasses shoved atop her head, gripping her phone. "You're a lunatic," she screamed, pointing at the fence. "Jake says you won't let him take his car. What's this auction nonsense?" I pointed to the sign by the platform, "Unauthorized Vehicle Auction. 6 p.m. Section 7.4, lets me dispose of abandoned cars." Clear enough. Her eyes widened at the sign, then she shrieked. "You can't be serious. These are valuable cars of important people." I rested a hand on the platform, voice firm. "Important people trespassed on my land, and left cars for 4 days. Consequences, Abigail." The crowd swelled past 40 now, some filming, murmurs growing louder. Abigail lowered her voice, stepping close, whispering with venom. "My husband will destroy you. You don't know who you're messing with." I brushed her hand off the platform, replying, "I know exactly who you are. Someone who thinks she's above the law. I've got land deeds, damage photos, valid notices. Sue away." She stepped back, face contorted, turning to Victor. "Call Sheriff Ortiz now. I want him to arrest this creep." At 4:45 p.m., Daniel Ortiz's patrol car rolled up, lights flashing. The crowd parted, and Ortiz stepped out, notepad in hand, glancing between me and Abigail with confusion. "Hey folks," he said, voice low. "Got a call about a dispute." Abigail pounced instantly. "Thank God you're here. This man's stealing our kids' cars, totally illegal." Ortiz raised an eyebrow, turning to me. "Mr. Harper, care to explain?" I handed him a folder from my bag, land deeds, damage photos, time-stamped notices, a printout of Section 7.4. "These cars were abandoned on my land, after an unpermitted party," I said, voice steady. "I gave legal notice per HOA rules. After 5 p.m., I can dispose of them." Ortiz studied it closely while Abigail paced, yelling, "He's twisting the law. No one uses that rule." I gave a dry laugh. "So the law's just for some people?" Ortiz looked up, nodding slightly. "This notice checks out. It's private land, Mrs. Wentworth," she screamed, "but they're the kids' cars." Ortiz stayed calm. "Under Oregon law, after valid notice, abandoned property can be sold to offset costs." Abigail paled, the crowd buzzing. The clock hit 4:58 p.m., 2 minutes left. I looked at her, voice low. 2 minutes to move them, otherwise the auction starts. Abigail clutched her phone, eyes blazing. The fight was nearing its end, but I knew she wasn't done. The clock struck 4:58 p.m., and the air around my land felt heavy as lead. Sheriff Daniel Ortiz stood between me and Abigail Wentworth, flipping through my documents, his eyes calm but sharp. The crowd, now over 50, pressed around the metal fencing, phones raised to film, murmurs mixing with the hum of the KON6 news van nearby. Abigail paced like a caged animal, face flushed, gripping her phone so tight, her knuckles whitened. "He can't do this, Daniel," she shrieked, voice cracking with rage. "These are the kids' cars, make him stop." I stood by the platform, arms crossed, watching Ortiz. Ortiz looked up from the papers, voice low, but firm. "Mrs. Wentworth, from what I see, Mr. Harper followed procedure. This is his private land, per this survey." He pointed to my deed, then flipped to the damage photos. Koi pond trashed, meadow ruined. Notices were posted Monday, over 24 hours ago, per Pinewood Meadows HOA Section 7.4. Abandoned vehicles on private land can be disposed of after valid notice. Abigail cut in, voice piercing. "But they're my kids' and her friends' cars. They're not abandoned, they'd pick them up later." I stepped forward, pointing at my watch. "Later? It's been 4 days, Abigail. Deadline's 5 p.m. today, 1 minute left." Ortiz turned to me, eyebrow raised. "You've got proof the notices were posted on time?" I nodded, pulling out my phone, opening Tyler's camera footage. "Here, 11:45 p.m. Monday." I placed each orange envelope on the windshields, time-stamped. Ortiz watched the clip, nodding slightly. "Clear enough," he said, handing my phone back. Abigail lunged, grabbing at the documents in Ortiz's hands, but he held firm. "Calm down," he warned, voice stern. This is legal, not emotional, she panted, spinning to Victor Grayson, who stood mute behind her. Victor, do something. Tell him the HOA's temporary permit was legit. Victor stepped up, stammering. Daniel, Abigail says we approved temporary rights for the party. There might have been a paperwork mix-up. I interrupted, holding up the paper. Abigail flaunted Saturday. Mix-up? This is the permit she showed me. No signature from me. No prior notice. I called the HOA Monday. No meeting records on this. It's fake, Victor. Ortiz took the paper, skimmed it, then eyed Victor. Is that true? Victor bowed his head, face ashen. There might have been a procedural oversight. I gave a dry laugh. Oversight? You let 57 cars trespass on my land, with a fake document. That's a violation, not a mistake. The crowd erupted, some shouting he's right. Abigail spun, screaming at them. Shut up, this isn't your business. But the buzz only grew. Lily, her daughter, pushed through, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mr. Harper, don't sell Jake's car, please, she sobbed. His dad'll kill him, and he'll break up with me. I didn't know it'd get this bad. I looked at her, feeling a pang of pity, but then recalled the 5 dead koi floating in my pond, the wrecked meadow. I'm sorry for you, Lily, I said, voice low, but your mom and friends did this. Auction starts after 5 o'clock. The clock hit 5 o'clock. A small beep sounding from my laptop. Notice period over. I looked at Ortiz. Now what? He checked his watch, nodded. Deadlines passed. Per Oregon law, after valid notice, you can dispose of abandoned property to offset costs and damages. Abigail screamed, no, this isn't abandoned. We'll move them now. Ortiz shook his head. Too late, Mrs. Wentworth. Mr. Harper's got legal rights now. Jake rushed the fence, pounding it. Open it. I'm not letting you sell my car. I looked at him, voice cold. You had 4 days. It's not yours anymore. Victor pulled me aside, whispering desperately. Ethan, stop this. Name your price. We'll write a check now. I met his eyes. Not about money, Victor. It's about justice. She thinks she's above the law, but not today. Abigail overheard, lunging at me, grabbing my arm. You'll ruin my life. Ortiz gently pried her off. Mrs. Wentworth, don't make it worse. Touching him's assault. She stumbled back, face pale, yelling at the crowd. See this? He's insane. I turned to the platform, opening my laptop. 5:02 p.m., I said loudly, voice carrying over the crowd. Auction starts at 6 o'clock. Anyone want a cheap Porsche? Hit the site now. The crowd roared, some laughing, some shaking their heads. Abigail spun to Ortiz, near begging. You have to stop him. Ortiz shrugged. I don't see anything illegal here. Mr. Harper's within his rights, on his land. Lily cried harder, running to her mom, while Jake stood frozen by the fence. I locked eyes with Abigail, her gaze blazing but powerless. My phone buzzed, Clara's text, Porsche at $25,000, ready to launch. I replied, wait till 6 o'clock, they're out of moves. Ortiz stood by me, voice low. I checked with my superior, everything's legit, but she won't let this go easy. I nodded, glancing at my watch, 5:05 p.m. The climax had hit, but I knew Abigail had one last play. I stood firm on the platform, ready for whatever came next. At 5:05 p.m., I stood on the platform, eyes locked on Abigail Wentworth, as she spun between rage and helplessness. The crowd, over 50 strong, still milled around my land, whispering, filming, while Sheriff Daniel Ortiz stood nearby, notepad in hand. The 7 cars gleamed behind the metal fencing under the fading sun, and the laptop's beep echoed in my mind. The deadline had passed. The auction loomed. Abigail screamed one last time at Ortiz, you have to stop him, but he just shrugged. The law's with Mr. Harper. I checked my watch, 55 minutes to 6 p.m., when Clara would launch the site. Then Victor Grayson grabbed my arm, voice low and frantic. Ethan, let's talk inside. Don't let this go further. I glanced at Abigail, saw her clutching a sobbing Lily, then nodded at Victor. Fine, but it changes nothing. I turned to Ortiz. You'll witness. He nodded, following me. Victor, Abigail and 3 pale-faced HOA board members into the house. The living room felt cramped as they crowded around the coffee table, the air thick with late afternoon heat and collective anger. Abigail refused to sit, pacing by the fireplace, clutching her designer bag like a weapon. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she spat, eyes blazing. I sat in my armchair, replying calmly, "No, Abigail, I'd rather be fixing the meadow your guests trashed, but this is the situation you made." I slid a folder across the table, 3 pages I'd prepared last night, concise but sharp. "My terms," I said, voice firm. "First, the HOA admits in writing you were wrong to use my land without consent, and pays $7,800 for damages landscaping, Koi, meadow. I've got photos and quotes from 3 contractors." Victor opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "Second, Abigail resigns from the HOA board immediately. Her spot goes to someone properly elected, not handpicked by cronies." Abigail gasped, a hiss like a snake. "Never. I've been on that board 8 years. I stared her down. 8 years bending rules for you and fining others for petty stuff. Mrs. Klein got $100 for her maple tree, Mr. Jensen $50 for his flag. But you? Parties till 2 a.m., no permits, no complaints." "Third," I continued, "the HOA amends its rules. All private land use rights need the owner's signature, no more verbal deals." Ortiz nodded slightly, jotting something in his pad. Abigail lunged at the table, slamming her hand down. "This is blackmail. I won't sign anything." I shrugged, opening my laptop. "Your call. Auction starts at 6 o'clock. Porsches at $25,000. Someone in Seattle's drooling over it." The crowd outside began banging on the door, calling Abigail's name, the noise seeping through the walls. Victor stood, voice trembling. "Ethan, we can settle. $7,800 no issue, but Abigail resigning. That's huge." I gave a dry laugh. She made it huge when she let 57 cars wreck my land. Tension spiked as Abigail turned to Ortiz. "See this? He's extorting us." Ortiz shook his head. "No, Mrs. Wentworth. This is legal consequence. I don't see anything off here." She spun back, eyes red, but then the door flew open. Henry Wentworth, Abigail's husband, strode in, suit rumpled, face tight. "Abigail, enough," he said, voice low but cutting. She whirled, stunned. "Henry, what are you doing here?" He stepped to the table, looking at me. "I heard everything from Victor on the phone. Ethan, I'm sorry for this. I didn't know what she'd done until today." I raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the sincerity in his eyes. Henry turned to Abigail. "Sign it. We can't let the auction go on. Jake called me, crying about his car. I don't want this blowing up bigger in the press." Abigail shrieked, "Are you crazy? I'm not resigning." Henry grabbed her shoulders, voice low but steel. "Abigail, I know about the HOA funds. If the board audits the books, it's over. Sign it, or we lose everything." Her face went white, hands shaking. "What funds?" Victor asked, but Henry ignored him, facing me. $7,800 and she resigns. "We agree. Cancel the auction now." I looked at Ortiz, who nodded. "If you accept, I'll witness." Abigail collapsed onto the couch, mascara streaking her cheeks, hands trembling as she took the pen. Victor offered. "This is a nightmare," she whispered, but signed the folder, each stroke forced out. Victor and Henry signed next, Ortiz noting it as witness. I texted Clara, "Cancel the auction." They signed. She replied, "Damn, but congrats." I shut the laptop, looking at Abigail. "Done. Your cars are free once the check's in my hand." Henry pulled me aside, voice low. "Thanks for not pushing this further. Abigail was wrong, but I'll fix it." I nodded, then asked, "What's the HOA fund thing?" He sighed. "She used community money for our house. I'll repay it, but don't tell anyone." I nodded, promising nothing. It wasn't my mess anymore. Abigail stood, bolting out the door without a glance. Victor and the HOA trailed her, heads down. Ortiz clapped my shoulder. "You played hard, Harper. They won't forget this." I smiled faintly. "Good, I won't either." Through the window, I saw the crowd erupt as Abigail fled, some clapping. The clock hit 5:45. The auction didn't happen, but I'd won. I stepped onto the porch, breathing the cool air off Silverlake. Abigail might hate me, but the law had spoken for me. The battle was over, but I knew the fallout was just starting. I stepped onto the porch at 5:50 p.m., Pinewood Meadows still buzzing after the living room showdown. The crowd of over 50 began to thin, but some lingered, filming the metal fencing and whispering about Abigail Wentworth. The Coin 6 news van stayed parked nearby, the reporter scribbling furiously as Abigail stormed out of my house, face pale, dragging Lily without looking at anyone. Victor Grayson and the HOA slunk off, heads bowed like they'd lost a major fight. I took a deep breath, victory mingling with exhaustion. Abigail had signed $7,800 and her resignation, but Henry's whisper about HOA funds lingered in my mind. The next day, Abigail appeared at my door, holding a oversized check printed with $7,800, dressed in silk but lacking her usual swagger. A small crowd gathered across the street, cameras flashing as she handed me the check in front of the reporter's lens. "Smile, Abigail," I muttered, jaw tight. "Gotta look happy when you lose." Her eyes shot daggers, but she forced a stiff grin for the cameras. "This is just the start," she hissed through clenched teeth as the reporter turned away. "You've made a big enemy, Ethan." I took the check, voice calm. "No, I just enforced the law you thought you could dodge. Now go." She spun on her heel, climbed into her car, leaving me with the check and curious neighborly stares. I used the money to hire a repair crew right away. By afternoon, workers had cleared the trash from the koi pond, laid fresh soil for the meadow, and replanted wildflowers. But that evening, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Henry Wentworth on the porch, no Abigail, hands in pockets, face weary. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice low. I hesitated, then nodded, letting him inside. He declined the coffee I poured, sitting stiffly on the couch, eyes on the floor. "I owe you an apology," Henry said, voice rough. "I didn't know what Abigail did to your land until Jake called me yesterday, crying about his car. Lily's birthday wasn't worth wrecking someone's property." I sat across from him, surprised by his sincerity. "Thanks," I replied simply, but saw he wasn't done. Henry sighed, meeting my eyes. "There's more you should know. Abigail used HOA funds to renovate our house, new flooring, a backyard pool. She logged it as community improvements, but it was all personal spending." My jaw dropped, disbelief sinking in. "How much?" Henry rubbed his hands, voice quiet. "About $40,000 over 3 years. I found out last month, told her to repay it, but she refused. That's why I made her sign yesterday. If the board audits the books, it's all out." I leaned back, mind reeling. "That's a crime, Henry. Why not report it?" He gave a sad smile. "I wanted to, but Abigail's Lily's mom. I pulled from personal savings, repaid it all today, $42,000 with interest. Just please don't tell anyone. We're leaving Pinewood Meadows soon." I nodded, promising nothing. This was bigger than I'd thought. "Your house on the market yet?" I asked. Henry nodded. "Listed today. We're moving to Bend." I'm tired of her drama. Henry stood, shaking my hand before leaving. "You did right standing up," he said, eyes flickering briefly. She needed this lesson. I shut the door, sank onto the couch, still holding my cold coffee. Abigail wasn't just arrogant, she was an embezzler. I opened my laptop, checking an email from the HOA this morning, emergency meeting next week, to elect a new member replacing Mrs. Wentworth. I smiled. Justice wasn't just mine, but Pinewood Meadows too. Days later, the meadow started healing. I planted more tulips myself, watched the koi pond sparkle with fresh water, feeling lighter. Abigail might leave with her grudge, but she had no power here anymore. Henry kept his word. Rumors of their move spread fast, and I knew the HOA fund secret would surface if the board dug deep. I stood on the porch, gazing at Silverlake shimmering under the moon, victory feeling fuller now. Abigail lost, not just over my land, but her own greed. A week after Abigail handed over the check, I stood in the meadow, hands dirty from planting more tulips. The repair crew had finished, the koi pond gleamed with new water, the stone path was scrubbed free of oil, and grass was sprouting, though it'd take months to fully recover. I spent the $7,800 from Abigail's check as planned: new koi, a crew to replant wildflowers, and a small wooden gazebo by Silverlake, dubbed Fairview Point, a simple name tied to the justice I'd fought for. I admired the work, relief settling in. The land I loved was breathing again, and Abigail was no longer Pinewood Meadows' looming shadow. News of the near auction spread through the neighborhood, but the bigger surprise came the following Tuesday. I received an HOA letter, emergency meeting at 7 p.m. PSEC, Pinewood Meadows Community Center. Agenda, financial audit and new member election. I went, more curious than expecting much. The meeting room was packed, nearly 80 residents, from Mrs. Klein to Mr. Jensen, crammed onto plastic chairs, the air taut like a string about to snap. Victor Grayson stood at the mic, face weary, but Charles Lowell, a retired judge newly elected to replace Abigail, ran the show. Glasses perched on his nose, his deep voice filled the room. After an emergency financial audit, we found $42,000 misused from the HOA fund over the past 3 years. Gasps rippled through the room, a few shouting "By who?" Charles raised a hand, continuing. Mrs. Abigail Wentworth withdrew the money for personal expenses, masked as community improvements. Her husband, Henry Wentworth, repaid it all with interest on Monday. Their family has left Pinewood Meadows. Their house was listed last week. I sat still, unsurprised, after Henry's revelation, but the crowd erupted. Mrs. Klein stood, voice trembling. I knew it. She fined me for my maple tree, but redid her house with our money. Mr. Jensen nodded. She always thought she was queen here. Charles banged a gavel, calling for order. We've amended the rules. All private land use now requires the owner's signature. Victor stays on the board, but under strict oversight. After the meeting, a few approached to shake my hand. Mrs. Keesank, Wen hugged me tight, whispering, "You did what no one dared, Ethan." "Thank you." Mr. Jensen clapped my shoulder. "You gave us a chance to start over." I smiled, feeling for the first time I wasn't just the odd neighbor living alone. Victor came over, offering me a soda from the drink table. "I didn't expect it to get this big," he said, voice quiet. "But you were right, we needed change. Property values are up, complaints are down." I sipped the soda, nodding. "That's fairness, Victor. People just want to be treated equal." 2 months later, I stood at Fairview Point, gazing at the meadow blooming with new wildflowers. I hosted my first summer picnic on my land, not my original plan, but Mrs. Klein and others insisted. Over 60 residents came, bringing sandwiches and lemonade, kids running around the gazebo, laughing loud. The HOA voted to officially name it Fairview Point, a wry nod to the saga. Charles Lowell raised a glass of lemonade in the sunset, voice carrying. "To a new Pinewood Meadows, where the law's the law, and the community's ours." People clapped, some smiling my way. I walked to the lake, watching the water glow golden in the fading light. Abigail may have left with her grudge, but she left a better neighborhood, not by choice, but because I made her face consequences. I picked up a pebble, tossed it into the water, watching ripples spread. Pinewood Meadows wasn't a place of petty fines and privilege anymore. It was home, for the first time in years. I turned back, seeing Mrs. Klein wave me over for cake. I smiled, stepping toward the light and laughter. 3 months after the picnic, I was watering tulips near Fairview Point, when a familiar car rolled into my driveway, Lily Wentworth's old Honda Civic. She stepped out, no longer the sobbing teen from auction day, but more confident, holding a box of homemade cookies. "Sorry I'm late, Uncle Ethan," Lily called, her smile bright. "College apps nearly killed me." I set down the watering can, wiped my hands on my shirt, grinning back. "No problem, you're here now. What's in the box?" She held it up. "Chocolate chip cookies. I made them to thank you." Lily started visiting a few weeks after Abigail and Henry left Pinewood Meadows. The first time, she stood at my door, hesitantly apologizing for her mom. "I didn't know she'd do that to your land," she said, eyes red. "I just wanted a fun party." I invited her in, poured lemonade, told her it was fine. I didn't blame her. But then Lily kept coming, not to apologize, but because she found we both loved plants. I taught her about native wildflowers. She shared her dream of studying environmental science, something her mom never supported. I started helping her pick schools, file applications, write recommendation letters. Today she came with good news. We sat at Fairview Point, overlooking Silverlake's shimmer. I got into Oregon State, environmental science, Lily said, eyes shining. Not the business school Mom wanted. This is my choice. I nodded, proud like she was my own niece. Well done. How'd your mom take it? Lily sighed, picking at a cookie. House sold. They moved to Bend last week. Dad's relieved, but Mom's still mad at everyone here, especially you. I chuckled. She'll get over it. What about you? Lily gazed at the lake smiling. I'm good. You helped me see I can choose for myself. Mom doesn't control me anymore. I stood, leading Lily along the lake shore, pointing out new wildflower blooms. You know, this wasn't just about my land, I said, voice low. It was about standing up when it matters. Abigail thought power bought everything, but she was wrong. Lily nodded, tossing a pebble into the water. I used to be scared of Mom, but now I want to do what I love, not what she wants. I patted her shoulder. That's the biggest lesson, Lily. Live for yourself. As dusk fell, we headed back to the gazebo. Fireflies began dancing over the meadow, golden light from the lake reflecting on Lily's face. Charles Lowell, now official HOA president, had raised a toast at last week's picnic, to boundaries respected and lessons learned. Those words echoed in me now. I looked around. Pinewood Meadows wasn't a place of fines and fear anymore. Neighbors waved each morning. Mrs. Klein brought coffee. Mr. Jensen shared war stories. A real community, not Abigail's shadow. Lily left as night fell, promising to visit before college. I stood alone at Fairview Point, staring at stars twinkling over the lake. Abigail might hate me, but she left something better. A united neighborhood, a girl finding her path, and my beloved land reborn. I realized standing up wasn't just winning a fight, it was making everything better. I picked up one last pebble, threw it into the water, watching ripples stretch wide. Pinewood Meadows was home now, and I was part of it, more than ever. In modern American society, HOAs like Pinewood Meadows are a familiar fixture, managing everything from landscaping to resident behavior, but sometimes abused by people like Abigail, who used money and connections to bend rules, like letting 57 cars park on Ethan's land without permission or embezzling $42,000 from community funds. Ethan, with his resolve to protect his land by auctioning the cars, embodies the American spirit of independence and belief in justice, a core value in U.S. culture, where private property rights are fiercely guarded by laws like the Section 7.4 he invoked. Lily's shift, from a teen controlled by her mom to choosing environmental studies, mirrors a trend among today's American youth seeking their own identity, breaking free from family pressure. The lesson from this story isn't just standing against injustice, but doing it smartly and persistently in real life. Ethan didn't just get mad, he researched laws, documented damage like the koi pond and meadow, and teamed up with friends like Clara and Tyler to build legal pressure. Advice for Americans today when facing unfairness, like overreach in a community or workplace: know your rights like Ethan with HOA rules, gather hard evidence, and build a support network. Don't let emotions drive you, use the law and unity, like Ethan turned Fairview Point into a symbol of fairness, and like Lily, have the courage to forge your own path, even against family or societal pushback. The story reminds us justice and change don't come from silence, but from strategic action, a practical lesson for life in the U.S. today. If you enjoyed Ethan's stand for justice in Pinewood Meadows, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next neighborhood drama. Thanks for joining, and see you in the next video with more valuable lessons.